welcome to Gila and Guests. Today's topic is buying a home for investment, and we have two great and fun guys with us today to talk about it. We have Iankelovic. I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Sounds great.
And you're a mortgage broker?
I am.
With any organization, a company?
I'm currently a mortgage broker with mortgagebrokers.com, which this year was voted one of, I think, #1 for one of Canada's, #2 for Canada's fastest growing companies.
Amazing. I wasn't aware of that. So good information, and we're going to be giving our viewers all your contact information, and hopefully you can get some new clients out of this. We also have Michael Switzer, who is a RE/MAX, what do you call yourself?
I'm a real estate broker with RE/MAX Realtron.
A real estate broker?
Yes.
You're not supposed to say real estate agent.
No, well, an agent would kind of per se that you were a real estate sales representative, but I'm actually a broker.
So does that mean that you supervise agents?
It just means that it's just really a matter of showing that it's the higher level of education that you can get as a real estate agent.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Okay, and I know you have a young family and you're working hard, so everybody's busy.
Yes.
When people buy a house for investment, I think that a lot of people, it's their biggest investment in their life. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what can they do to protect that investment, first of all, to protect themselves from buying a house that needs way more repairs than perhaps they had considered?
Then the main thing is to always consult a professional, and it usually starts with a sales representative or a mortgage or a real estate agent that actually has access to the properties. That way they can get an indication of what type of property they're seeking to purchase, what type of work needs to get done to the property, and that way they can have a bit of a mindset in terms of what the purchase price would be and how much money they actually need in order to invest into the property and to acquire the property.
Well, before they start looking at a property, should they first consider meeting with a broker, or should they meet with their bank? I'm sort of a little confused about when you go to the bank, when you go to the broker. To be honest, when I purchased homes, I arranged for mortgages through relatives, and that was always very helpful. I'm aware that there's certain hidden fees often in mortgages. What should they do? Should they first come and see you and find out what price range they're able to afford?
You see, the benefit of working with a mortgage broker is that essentially we are specialists. The way I compare it to is we're the cardiologists. Purchasing a home is going to be your single largest investment, and that's why we believe that it's imperative that they work with professionals who do these types of transactions every single day. The average house, today was just reported, the average house in Toronto is $500,000. I mean, you need the right insights, you need the right advice. A mortgage broker, as myself, I work with all the major banks, most of the major banks, including other lenders that are not available through the mainstream. The advantage of that is I have products and rates and services that are otherwise not available through a traditional bank.
When we say Toronto, do we mean the GTA, or we're just talking about Toronto itself?
To the GTA.
The entire GTA,
Yeah,
500,000.
Well, it's under actually. I think it was for some, just under 500,000.
Well, I know the market is booming. I know people who are looking to get into the market for their first home. And do you recommend that people stretch themselves for that first home?
No.
Or they should just be comfortable? What's your recommendation?
Well, you know what? It's funny because, you really have to take there's no better way to say it than by answering someone like a mensch. And when I have clients, whether they're first-time buyers or they're looking for a luxury home, I will always tell them that if you were going to be stressing over the bills that you're paying, then you are making the wrong decision. And the last thing that you need to do is get yourself in a situation where you can call it house poor, you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, if you're stressing over things that you can prevent, then you're making the wrong decision to put yourself in a situation where you're going beyond where your means should take you. To answer your question from before, the first step that I always recommend to people is to actually go and speak to someone like Eric, who I highly recommend.
Thanks, Mike.
Do you work together a lot?
Oh yeah, we've done quite a lot of business together.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know what? The reason, and I can tell you the reason that I refer Eric a lot, and in this business of a million different, whether it's a real estate agent or a mortgage guy, there's so many different guys. But Eric's very creative, and he's never steered any of the clients that I've sent him wrong. And that's all I need to see. As long as my clients, and in the same way as I get it from. My whole business is based on referrals and by positive reinforcement from other people. Anybody that I've sent to Eric, I've never had a problem with, so I will continue to do so.
So let's talk just very, very, general.
Yeah.
We have a young couple. and say they're each earning $50,000 a year. They have $100,000 to put down that they've saved up and from wedding gifts, and maybe each of their parents are willing to lend them an interest-free loan, or hopefully it ends up being a gift sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
But, you know, and that's another thing, is that people should really sign, because I know of cases where there were divorces and parents gave a significant amount of money towards the house, and nobody's ever expecting a divorce.
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt to put it in writing. Is that a possibility, to put it in writing?
I actually always have my clients do that when they're whether they're getting married or not. So even in situations where someone's buying something and they're a couple.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I can only go so far as to make somebody sign something, but I will always recommend to people that they discuss it with their lawyer, and you know, any good lawyer who really truly cares about the interests of the people that they're representing, and it goes both ways, because as you know, once money comes involved into something, things change. And you know, sadly, another part of the business that I see a lot of is the divorces, and you know, it's kind of the bad and sad part of what I do, but I come across it quite often. You know?
Some houses almost seem to have bad karma, recurring divorces in the same houses. No?
Yeah,
I want to ask Eric, if these people, if this is I'm giving you an imaginary couple, what would you ballpark? I mean, just you can't say specifics.
Sure. There's a couple of factors that come into play for mortgage approval and mortgage affordability. The main one is obviously the purchase price and the type of down payment as a percentage of the purchase price. So in a scenario like yours, if the clients were purchasing a $500,000 home, putting $100,000 down, the banks look at the loan to value, the equity that the individuals are investing in the property. The second thing that we do also is we look at the debt that they're currently carrying. So if two clients are completely debt-free, it does make the approval process for them to be able to purchase that home a lot simpler than a family that's carrying a significant amount of credit card debt, car payments, student loan debt. So it's really on a case-to-case basis. Our advice is always, though, to contact Michael and I, a mortgage agent and a real estate broker, sooner than later. So that way we can start to advise you and work with you. There have been scenarios where I have advised clients 6 months in advance to prepare them for the purchase.
Right.
And the key there is that way they know, and everybody's got the information in terms of what they can afford to purchase. So Michael can do his job accurately and start to look at a price range that is attainable. And I can start to prepare the clients with what we call debt management to allow them to be able to purchase it. So generally speaking, on that type of income, you're probably looking at about a $400,000 mortgage.
Would be considered reasonable today.
There.
What about if real estate? What about if interest rates go up? I mean, that's what's so scary to me, is people carrying. It's so affordable now to have a $400,000 or $500,000 or even $600,000 mortgage.
It's inevitable, though. They
will go up. Its question is when. And I still remember in the 1980s, I was in university out in Waterloo, and professors telling me, we're earning a decent living, saying, I'm thinking of putting my house up for sale. My mortgage came up for renewal. It used to be people have these little 5-year mortgages, not anymore. And the interest rates, I remember, tell me if I'm wrong, 18%.
Yeah, they went up to 20%. Yeah.
I get that a lot from first-time home buyers when they bring their parents in. Rates today are as low as 2.25, and maybe we could even shred, a couple of points here and there. My response is that the banking system today is much more sophisticated than it was back in the 80s.
And especially the Canadian banking system, too.
Right, because especially when we see what's happened in the States, and how sustainable and how well the banking system in Canada has
So people
performed.
don't have to worry that much, but you could see it maybe going up to 10% in the next decade or two, or unlikely?
I mean, the biggest indication that we have is that the real estate market cannot be looked at in isolation of the other aspects of the economy. So we've got a Canadian dollar that is hovering at about above par. I mean, the implications of increasing interest rates beyond a certain point would have a negative impact on the Canadian dollar, because the Canadian dollar could go from $1 to $1.10 to $1.15. Because the higher the interest rate, the more attractive foreign investors are in Canadian securities.
Which is why they can't go and raise it at.
Well, they don't want the Canadian dollar to go higher.
Right, because 40% of whatever Ontario produces finds its way into the U.S. market. So a higher Canadian dollar actually is detrimental to Canadian exports and manufacturing. So I believe that there's other variables in the overall economy, like what's happening internationally, in Greece, and in the Middle East, you know, in Libya and in Egypt. I mean, no longer can you just look at Canada in isolation and say, well, Canada's performing well, so rates therefore will go up. It's more of an interglobal.
It's also important to focus on the fact that you can't look at Canada as a whole and say the real estate in Canada when there are certain pockets in Canada that have driving forces that are far better than any of the other properties or other cities that you're seeing, based on the amount of people that are coming here every day. You know, right. they're not. You can't make any more land. You know, you can't make any more. So the only.
Well, I think that's what's driving up the costs in Toronto.
Right.
I mean, Montreal. I'm from Montreal. Yeah. It's a different real estate market, and partly Montreal is an island, and there's a limited amount of room to grow, and anything off the island is valued much lower. So the island itself, real estate is. It's not what it's not what it could be if things, you know, the whole political situation in Montreal it's still affected by the Quebec political situation.
I can tell you, like, I have people, and obviously it's a very common question that you'll get as a real estate agent about the rates and about, you know, people being very nervous, and rightfully so. You know, I'm nervous. I have a big mortgage too. You know, but at the same time, what is there out there that you will not have some kind of a risk associated to where you're putting your money into? You know,
there's always risk in whatever.
There's always a risk. So,
but we've got to remember that Toronto is still a mecca.
Right.
That's right.
Immigration's coming in, the financial center of Canada. I mean, there's always people coming into the country. You know, even from the outskirts of Ontario, they're coming in for employment, or international students are coming in. We're personally seeing a lot of immigration, you know, coming in from the Middle East. You know, whereas before it was China, it was Hong Kong.
The luxury homes that I'm selling right now, I'm not selling them to people from Toronto.
Well, even that penthouse at the Four Seasons Residences, it's an international buyer. That's all they would tell us.
It's a lot of you know, Midland Chinese buyers, and exactly. You know, and you know what? You can't even generalize it. They're coming from all over, and
that drives up the price.
And that drives up the prices because you know, these people are coming
and they have money. They're coming.
They're coming,
and they have money. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to talk some more about what we can do to protect ourselves when buying possibly the most important investment of our life. And welcome back. We're talking about buying homes for investment. So that doesn't just mean your home that you're living in, but you can buy other homes for investment. There is a minimum down payment on purchasing a house to live in, and that's 5%. What about 5%. Buying a home for investment, a secondary home? Is there a different minimum down payment?
There is. If you're purchasing an investment property for the purposes of generating income, then the banks require, the government requires you put a minimum down payment of 20%. On such a purchase. However, if you're looking to buy a cottage or, you know, that type of second home, I mean, there are ways that you can purchase that under special second home programs that would allow you to put anywhere from 10% down to make the purchase. So it really depends on what your intention is, whether you intend to live in the property or whether you intend to turn it into an income generating.
Well, in terms of cottages, what I think a lot of people don't consider is that home insurance for a cottage is higher than the house you're living in. Somehow people think, oh, it's going to be cheaper because it's just a cottage and I don't have fancy stuff in there. It's actually more expensive to insure a cottage. There's your, you know, cable bills, there's your phone bills, there's all these bills that you're going to be paying double. Oftentimes people have to hire a caretaker because they're not there to supervise the cottage, and you're not insured unless a caretaker goes into the cottage every, you know, few days or something like that.
You know, I actually have people coming to me all the time and asking me if I can help them find a cottage, and I'll tell them most of the time that I would rather, like, you know, if it was for a family member or something, I have found a few cottages. Aside from that, it's a different, you know, there's a lot of things that come along with buying a cottage, whether it's shore allowance rules or, you know, that's one of the, what you just pointed out is a major thing because the insurance is very, very high on these cottages.
How much more?
You know, I think that it might even be, I've seen situations where I had someone living in a house in the city that was worth $500,000 or $600,000, and their cottage, which was worth around the same, was like $2,000 more for insurance. You know what I mean?
That's significant.
So it's very significant.
And when you consider that, you know, you could rent a cottage for a month, because if you factor in the weekends and you go there for a 2 weeks vacation, you can rent a cottage for a month for oftentimes what it costs just to carry your cottage, or even less. And people have to look at all aspects. In terms of investing, though, in property, most of the time people don't invest in buying a house. It's my understanding that if you rent a house out to somebody, A, they can trash it if they don't treat it that well. But B, oftentimes you're not getting the value of the house. There's a limit to what people are going to pay in rent. It would have to be a pretty small house, I think, to cover your costs.
Well, it's a patient purchase. Like, it's a patience thing. You know, it's a matter of having somebody else paying off. Like, in my opinion, if you're going to, I'm sorry, I hit the mic. In my opinion, if you're going to invest your money into buying an income-producing real estate property, I wouldn't go with a house. There are
You'd
several,
buy a commercial property.
Well, multiplex buildings. If you want to start smaller, you can go with you know, a twoplex up to a fourplex kind of situation. You know, that's something that I've been involved in for years, is multiplex buildings. And you know, if you're going to put the same amount of money into something, it really just comes down to, and not only that, but the same amount of headache, because you know, you get all types of people who are coming in as renters, and you really hit the nail there when you said that they don't take such good care of it, because sometimes people, like, you know, they're living in these homes, they don't care at all about the condition that they're leaving the house in, or how, you know, especially when you want to sell it. Imagine trying and selling, you know, I sell homes and there's renters in there, and it's like, you know,
it's hard to get in to show the house.
It's hard to get into showings, and then the people finally get in, and it's a mess, and there's people sitting on the couch. You know, there's the difference of how you would, you know, when you're selling a house, you need to make sure that you're doing
just
the right
listening
thing.
to you, I'm shaking.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason, like, you know, one of the things that you know, why you hire a good real estate agent to come in, because they, you know, you have to know how to deal with all different types of people and all different types of personas. And sometimes the personas that we're dealing with on behalf of our clients are, you know, the kind of people you don't want to be talking to.
It's hard to work with the public. That's
right.
number one. And, you know, as somebody who's worked with the public for decades, I hate to say how long, you know, people, you know, I have a friend who uses the word unique.
Yeah.
Somebody's very unique.
That's right.
And I just like that, because it just sums up everything in a very polite manner.
That's
but
right.
people can be very hard to deal with. And I think that there's probably people you have to talk into more often than not looking down in terms of how big a mortgage they should be carrying. Right. But aren't there people that you're trying to talk up? Isn't that interesting, that sometimes people maybe aren't looking at...
Well, purchasing a home is usually a very emotional process. I mean, you walk into a home for the first time, you love it.
Well, it's a home versus a house.
Right.
Maybe they should be looking at houses,
It's
not homes.
to build, but it's... You look at it as, when I bought my home, I looked at it as if, like, can I live here? My children, how's it going to be? Is it a yard? I mean, you look at it becomes very emotional. Yeah. When you're looking at purchasing an investment property,
dollars and cents.
It's dollars and cents. And I tell my clients, remove the element of like the bathroom is beautiful, because that doesn't matter.
Right.
What matters is, what are going to be your monthly expenses, and then your monthly revenue, your monthly income, and how much money would you be able to make at the end of the day in terms of cash flow. And you also have to consider that there's some appreciated value associated with that purchase. So am I purchasing it in a good area? Is it near a subway? Is it high demand? And that's where somebody like Michael comes into play, because they're able to provide him with, like, the rental forecasts and the estimates for rental income to really be able to gauge whether or not they're making the right black or white decision, as opposed to somebody who's purchasing a home to live in.
Well, Councillor Santaracco, who I believe is your councillor, maybe both of your councillors, in Vaughan, is proposing that the city look into legalizing basement apartments. And as somebody who's done some canvassing for political purposes, I can tell you there's a lot. They're not legal. They're already there.
They're there.
There's a lot of basement apartments, certainly in the Glenshield area of Vaughan. And how do you feel about that? How do you feel about the basement apartments? Would you advise somebody to buy a house knowing that it has an illegal basement apartment that they're planning to rent?
It's a good question, and I can tell you, like you said, they're all over the place, and it's not just Glenshields. They're, you know, you name an area, they're there. And that goes all the way down to the water in the city too.
I'm always surprised that the neighbors don't complain because there's so many more cars.
For sure.
It's not to me about the density, and we do need to bring more density, and we do need to provide more affordable housing, and it's very unenvironmental to have a house where the kids have moved out, the adults are upstairs, and there's half a house that could be rented.
The positive that comes along with it is really for the people who want the home that are struggling and know, okay, well, I could put this nice student or this nice couple or this nice, old couple in my basement, and they're going to pay off 70% of my mortgage every month, and they don't make a peep. You know what I mean? So there's a major plus to it that comes along with it, but then there's also the other side of it, like we said, with the unique side of it, and the unique people who will come in, and all of a sudden there's a guy who, I didn't know he smoked, and I didn't know he this, and why are his friends all, and I've seen a few horror stories with people like that who've had renters in their basement, and half the people that have renters in their basement don't even realize that their basement apartments are illegal. It's so common that they just might not realize it, and how I feel about it one way or another, I personally, I wouldn't want to have a renter in the basement, but I can totally understand why somebody who wants to have a certain home and a certain type of home that might be stretching themselves financially, and to put a simple little basement apartment in there and have somebody pay a significant part of their mortgage for them, and at the same time pay towards their equity, which is the real thing. Like, it's not just that they're paying their bills; they're putting money into their bank account in some respect, as far as into the equity of the home. So I can understand it, but.
What I like to try to explain to people is that when it's an illegal basement apartment, very often, people have separate mail boxes, and I guess the postman, he adjusts. He sees, 11 Glen Shields Boulevard, A and B, and he knows A is this one because they put an A on that mailbox, and B is the basement.
Councillor Rocco it exists. Yeah. So instead of ignoring it and pretending like it doesn't exist, to address it and then to bring it above board, because nobody really wants to operate an illegal apartment.
It might be more proactive to just embrace it.
But if you look at affordable housing in Thornhill, in terms of just as a sample, if somebody wants to rent an apartment building, they're renting a condo on DeSera, North Park, paying $1,800 a month. There's really no outlet, there's really no opportunity for real affordable housing as you leave Toronto, because I can't recall the last time a new apartment building was built in this city. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's been a long time.
In Vaughan?
In Toronto.
You mean as far as
a new apartment building?
Not condo, apartment for rent.
A brand new building that was built. They're just not being built anymore.
Affordable housing, yes.
There's more people coming in. So to rent a basement for $800, $900 is one thing, as opposed to having to go rent a condo in DeSera for $1,800, $1,900 bucks. I think that's.
But it all ties in with what we were talking about before, as far as there's different levels of people from the second they come to the country. So somebody will come here, and like I said, we have rental properties, we have multiplex buildings. That's sort of my family's business, aside from real estate. So aside from selling real estate, I should say. Yeah. But we see kind of the system of how it really works. These people come, and a lot of them are from all over the world, and they start here. They start in a rental property, which would be the equivalent of.
We're not arguing for or against basement apartments. What I'm kind of leading to, and what I'm trying to ask is, if somebody can afford a house for only, say, $400,000, they have $50,000 to put down, and they are not big income earners, would you say to them, hey, you can buy in Glen Shields a house?
Never.
You wouldn't recommend it to them?
No, I don't sell people on that, but I think that's, if they want to do it for the additional income or to make everything a little bit easier.
But not to make their basic.
Just to comment on Michael's, for example, we would not be able to use that income as part of their ability to service that debt.
But if those basement apartments were legal, would you be able to?
If they were legal, then yes. Then we
and
would
in
be
Toronto,
able to.
they're legal.
In some parts of
areas.
Toronto, yeah. Most 99% are not legal because you need 2 exits. They got
it's a fire
sprinklers. Like there's a whole. Most of them are not legal, but they are a reality in the city, and hopefully, they can work with the homeowners to bring them above board, because students are renting them all throughout downtown, and as we see the subway moving further and further north, I anticipate that there's just going to be the whole corridor along there, the Young University, the Spadina University line.
So it's not a way for people to make an investment unless they become legal. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's a good pointer.
Right? And what about if 2 families want to share a house. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, of course. We've got a lot of, oftentimes, especially with new immigrants coming to Canada, they come to Canada with, parents or grandparents or uncles or aunts or brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And
And
they
that's
tend to pool
legal
it
for
together.
them to pool
Absolutely.
it and to get approval
Absolutely.
based on them
They just own
pooling.
the property
And they own the
together.
property, right? And it depends on who goes on title, who doesn't go to title, those various
And there's
reasons.
no laws about how many family units can live in a house in
No.
Toronto or
Not
in Vaughan?
that-
I don't really know, to be
Not that
honest
I'm
with you.
aware of.
Because if you think about it,
There should be.
what's the limit? How would you like if next door 30 people moved in?
I've seen those houses, though. I'm not going to lie to you. I've walked into some properties, and I was like, "Are you guys having a party?" It's like, "No, there's no party." Oh, so this is just everyone lives here. Like, this is crazy, But in Thornhill Woods, in random areas, you go in there and you'll see. You walk in and somebody, whether they all are on title of the property is probably not the case, but they're still living in that house, and their next door neighbor still has to, live next to that house that has the 30 people living in there, and I'm sure it's frustrating.
So then there's the other flip side, which is zoning. Most people, when they buy a house, they assume it's only zoned for residential. Then there's the houses on the arterial roads or the regional roads that are also zoned commercial. They're homes, people can live in it. They can be a great investment because you've got a house, maybe your kids are older and you don't care that it's on a busier street, but you've got a house that has potential as a commercial property, and then there's the people who buy a house that's not zoned commercial, hoping to turn it into commercial. Do you advise people on that, or you don't get into?
That's really a risk.
You know what? I would say
Stay away from that?
It's not something that's really happened to me before. Most of the people that I'm working with, they're not really looking to get involved with that. I've sold commercial properties, but never had anyone really come to me with that and say that they're looking to buy something that's kind of zoned commercial, but they want to live in it as well. But there certainly will be some risks involved with that, I'm sure. And I've had situations where somebody's wanted to buy a church that was zoned for a church and
make it into a residence.
And make it into residence.
Well, that's beautiful out in the country. I've actually been in what
Yeah.
used to be a stable that was turned into a house, and I know that there are
they
churches.
can convert them, and look,
But you have to get the approval from the city. You have to get
That's
the
right.
permits,
That's right.
and it's always conditional.
That's right.
I think more often than not, they just buy the land and they move the churches, would be my understanding. But what about people buying their house, and then they want to set a certain amount of money aside? Would you advise them how much money they should be setting aside for furnishing, for alarms, for landscaping, for decks? Do you get involved in that, or you?
I do, yes. Well,
Yeah.
that's more of like, I think my role in that situation is, a lot of the time people come to me and they say, oh, well, you know what, we found the house, we know the mortgage is going to cost this much, and that's it. And I said, well, hold on a second there, buddy, let's see what you really got to pay. Land transfer tax, lawyer fees, moving fees, adjustment fees.
So a new home buyer buying a house for $500,000, what would be the fees associated with purchasing that house?
Well, it really depends if they're first-time home buyers, because your first-time home buyers, they're fortunate enough to be able to have a provincial land transfer tax rebate. So there's two land transfer taxes if you're purchasing in the city of Toronto. So the first thing we look at is the house in Toronto or is it in Vaughan? If it's in Toronto, then the clients have to incur two land transfer taxes. The City of Toronto land transfer tax and the provincial land transfer tax.
So Rob Ford isn't getting rid of that land transfer tax? Not anytime soon.
I don't
Apparently he was supposed to. I don't see it happening.
Well, I don't feel sorry for Toronto because I feel their property values are low for what their homes are worth.
Yes.
So you've got that scenario. Then you have to look at if it's a first-time home buyer, then they can receive rebates on both transactions. So that comes into play. And then there are the legal fees associated with the transaction, which is usually about $1,200 to close, to do the purchase. And then sometimes there's an appraisal fee that they might need to charge of $300. So really,
And then
at
home
the end of the
home
day,
inspection fees, how much are they these days?
Looking anywhere from $350 to $550.
we generally advise clients that they should have approximately 1.5% of the purchase price available for closing costs.
That's not bad.
1.5%.
And then what are real estate percentages these days?
Well, you're
usually?
looking, there's that's one thing that's obviously changing.
Negotiable.
But the standard fee is still a 5% commission, and 2.5% of it would be offered out to a cooperating broker.
I still remember when Remax came on the picture.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was a while ago, but I'm going to guess 30 years ago or something like that.
Sounds about right.
And they were significantly lower, their fees, than any other
I
brokerage.
think at that time they were 6%.
and the others were maybe 7%.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
And I remember being told, oh, they'll never make it. This is such a tough market to break into. And they just broke into it, just bang,
Yeah.
because so quickly, because their fees were lower, and I think that they negotiated more as well. Do you do more listing or bringing clients to homes that are already listed, or do you get to double it often?
I would say that both. Yes, I do a lot. You know, and in that respect, it's actually really good for my clientele because I have a very large database of people. So a lot of the time
that you've listed, or that you're looking for homes for?
Well, both. So what I'll do is, you know, I'm always looking for a way, and to be completely honest, to make more for myself. Right. To make more for my clients and to make more for my buyer.
If you double-end it, you're able to lower your fees.
I'm able to lower the fees. I'm not going to be, you know, like the word is really a chazar. You know, I'm not going to come in and charge somebody money that was there in order to offer out someone else to entice them to bring their buyers. But if I'm bringing a buyer to them, I'm able to, you know, drastically drop their commission rate and represent both parties. So, you know, all hands on the table, everything's clear, and you know, I do that quite often, and people. You know, really are able to save out, you know, thousands of dollars on commission that can then stay, and it's a win-win-win situation because I can make more.
I know of a lot of people that have stayed quite friendly with their real estate agent. It's very interesting. You know, you go to a wedding and you're sitting next to somebody, and how do you know the bride and groom? Oh, we help them buy their house. They feel that close to the person. They spend that much time with them. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back and talk with Eric and Michael a little bit more about buying homes and investing in properties. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again in a couple minutes. And welcome back. We're talking about buying homes, and the expression is location, location, location. How much does it matter? Personally, my advice, if I'm giving advice, which I like to give, as you can see, is the location is number one to me. It absolutely is number one. And do most people still feel that way? My belief is that Canadians who are Canadian-born are much more willing to put money, even $100,000 more, to be on a quiet dead-end court near a park than newer immigrants to Canada who, you know, in India, this was considered quiet, and they're happy to buy on our major streets. Do you find that as well?
Very accurate point, and that is the case. You know, I mean, location, 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 I don't think will ever go away, and you can look at certain pockets, whether you're in Thornhill, Richmond Hill, or, you know, Allenby, or Cedarvale, or Forest Hill, wherever you are in those certain pockets, you know, there's certain places that I know when I put this place on the market, it's going to sell, and I'm going to have multiple offers. Whereas on the other side of one street, like a Dufferin, a street like that, where you can get, you know, or even up in Thornhill, you can say Thornhill Woods, and then you cross the street, and you'll see not just the value of the properties decrease, but also the demographic completely change. And that really is, you know, showing exactly what you're saying is it's quite accurate. So,
well, some areas seem to have a lot of rental properties, and people aren't aware of it. I know that, I don't know if you're aware of the street Campbell, and there's Patrice, and there's a lot of rental properties on those streets, and people often buy a house, and they're wondering why their neighbors aren't taking care of the landscaping. And I know one person was shocked to find out how much rental property exists on that street. Is there a way for people to find out? I know sometimes people they want to know the ages of the people. It's not really politically correct to ask what nationality the people are on the street, but they certainly want to know if it's young families or older kids. Can people find out if it's rental properties? Is there an easy way to find out?
Well, realistically, I don't think that there's a website devoted to it kind of thing, but as far as finding out the type of the people, it's really just the old school way of doing it. If you ask me, it's just going for a drive and driving down the street on a Saturday afternoon, and you can see, you know, people say to me, "Well, are there kids?" I say, "Let's go for a drive." You know, like you can't. If you really wanted, you know, a real estate agent to look into it, I could tell you the owners' names and you know, look on title.
Well, that's the owners, but they're not necessarily the people living in the house.
That's right, and that's really why. So it's, you know, if you really want to see, you know, who's on a street, your best bet is just to go and take a drive down the street.
Do you ever advise people to knock on a door and find out is that considered politically correct?
No, but I've had people do that to me. Like that's another thing that, you know, what your agent should do. You know, like, I have people who have been, you know, I'm buying this house. This is what it's going to be, but I want to make sure, you know, and believe me, it's not a bad idea, because there's nothing worse in the world than buying your dream house and finding out that the Manson family lives next door, or somebody that's, you know, really, really, really aggressive lives next door, because that actually happened to a very good friend of mine that I put in a house, and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, when you walk outside and in a primarily, you know, Avenue in Lawrence, beautiful area, you know, you would never expect it. You would never expect two Rottweilers and a pit bull to run outside from the backyard when she has a little child. You know what I mean? Like, you have to check your neighbors. It's important.
But Michael, you don't always know. Oftentimes you move in and you initially meet people. They can be quite friendly, and one small thing, you know, your garbage blew on their lawn or something like that. People are always very quick to see what others do wrong, but they don't see what they do wrong. It's difficult. We all have to live together in this world, and I know sometimes people have said to me, well, I want to move up to King City to a bigger property because I'll be further away from my neighbors. It's tough. You still have neighbors. How are you going to ever get away from having neighbors? Yeah. But people have to know what kind of person they are, and are they somebody who can live in a condo? Are they somebody who can live in a townhouse or a semi-detached where they're sharing a wall with somebody else? I'm willing to pay quite a bit more money. I'd rather have a smaller house that's detached than... Do you feel that way? Do you speak to people sometimes about you're going to have to live with neighbors? You're not, if your house is going to be attached or a townhouse?
I think most people just know. You know, if someone's coming from a completely different neighborhood, which is quite often, like I'll have people who are moving from the city up to Thornhill, you know, that's the kind of thing that you may want to just kind of give them the layout of how it really works around here, and how the speed of the neighborhood, the flow of the neighborhood, and you know what you should expect from the neighborhood. But for the most part, you know, it's people really know what they want before they even tell you I want. Like, you know,
they've thought about it a lot. They have an
idea of what they're going to be.
And it's interesting because you start to see neighborhoods change. You know, the kids grow up and the kids move out, and then people want to downsize. And what do you advise to, say, a couple that's retired and on a very fixed income, Eric, and they want to stay in their house, but it's really, you know, making them quite poor, and they'd like to spend some time in Florida, and they have this house that the mortgage is paid off, and the house is worth, say, $800,000, $900,000, and they don't feel that they have to leave that entire sum to their children. They don't necessarily need all that money for their, you know, future. There is a type of mortgage that people can get. There are ways of financing yourself where...
yeah, it's called the CHIP. Well, there's a recent new program called the CHIP program, which allows you to essentially...
Is it CHIP or CHIP?
CHIP.
Okay. And
it essentially allows you to withdraw money from your house, and you don't have to pay it back unless you sell it or unless you pass away. So as long as you live there, you can continue to draw, but you don't make any payments until one of those two events happens.
But that's kind of a game, don't you think? And
well, the interest rate is, I mean, we're doing interest rates from as low as 2%, 2.5%. The last time I took a look at that program, the interest rates were about 5.5%.
Why not just get a home equity loan on your mortgage?
Well, you could do that, obviously with the qualifications and based on the equity. You still have to be able to maintain the monthly payments on that property. Another idea might be to actually sell that property and purchase something a little bit more manageable. Like it could be a condo or it could be a smaller home. You may not need to have a monstrous home. So those are all things that individuals need to look at. The other thing that I've done for some clients is we've taken some of the equity out of their existing homes and purchased investment properties, which has given them an income stream into retirement.
Just leverage them, basically.
So
essentially, that makes sense, actually.
So what we do is, because there's no real tax benefit in Canada to having your house paid off or to have a mortgage on it, because we can't use the deductions on the income taxes. But an investment property allows you to grow your real estate portfolio. So for example, you own one home valued at about $1 million. We take some equity out of there to allow you to purchase an investment property valued at $500,000. Well, now your real estate portfolio has just grown by 50%. So when the value of real estate appreciates by 10%, it's appreciating on the $1.5 million as opposed to the only one property that you had, which was your home. So it does give you an opportunity to be able to diversify and to create that income stream into retirement, because now you've got a source of revenue from the investment property in addition to the appreciation, annual appreciation of that property.
Well, are most people investing in a home, or are they most investing in commercial property in that kind of situation?
Well, I mean, duplexes or triplexes, I would
Or
also
condos.
consider to be like home, or condos as well. I consider those to be more homes. The commercial, I would say, would be 6 units or more, or storefront apartments. Those would be more commercial. But I mean, when I mean residential, I mean 1 or 2 or 3 apartments, and
But that can be a lot of aggravation.
Well, I mean, yeah, but so can the meltdown of the stock market in 2008, where a lot of people had their RSPs.
Right.
I mean, the values that I've seen in real estate have recovered and recovered strongly, if they even dipped for a little bit.
Well, I don't think commercial real estate really dipped. I don't think it really dipped. That was my impression.
So the little glitch that we saw in 2008 really impacted some individuals in terms of their RSPs, and they needed the money to be able to live. But imagine you had a rental property, you just hold on to it for an extra year, and you're still getting the same revenue stream you're getting, irrespective of what was going on in the markets around you. So in my own opinion, it does become a lot more of a solid investment. You're investing in something that you know that you own, as opposed to a market that we can't control.
If anything, the vacancy rates on our apartment buildings in those dips were obsolete. Like we had, you'd go from having, 5 or 6 units available in each one of these buildings to being sold out, and people calling you saying they need a place to lease, because even in a bad market, people need to lease a place to live.
Right.
You always need a place to live. So whether it's a home or it's a commercial property, there's definitely ways for these, and it really is kind of a baby boomer generation thing, where a lot of these people are downsizing. The homes that they originally bought, raised the family, and then the kids go off and start their own families, and they're sitting in these big homes. And these are a lot of properties I'm selling right now, actually, and just kind of downsizing these people into smaller homes or condos.
Do people ever pool their resources to buy commercial properties? Are there people who
it's quite
specialize in
common.
that?
Yeah, it's quite
And
common.
would you
You'll
put
see
them
it.
in touch with, somebody said, I want to invest in a
Well-
commercial property, but I don't want to buy some small little nothing. I'd rather buy 10% of a major
Generally
building.
speaking, when it comes to the financing of those types of projects, they generally come to me already like as a group.
Okay.
I mean, it's not so easy to kind of group people together, because
It's a
there's
real trust thing,
personalities,
too.
dynamics. I mean, usually it's 1 or 2 main guys, and then
leaders.
the rest are silent investors. Because they trust, they could be friends, they grew up together. One of them might be in construction, so if anything goes wrong, he can go in and fix it. The other guy is maybe the money guy, and he gets his other friends or colleagues involved. So my experience has always been that when a collective group of individuals come together to make an investment like that, they've actually known each other for years in most cases.
The real lesson that I would give on to anybody who's looking to do an investment property is to really, really, really make sure you know what you're getting yourself into, because whether it's you're buying one home, or you're buying 10 condos, or you're buying a multiplex building, there's headaches that come along with this, and there are all types of problems that will happen, not may happen, will happen, and do happen.
Right.
And from the perspective of a lot of people who say to me, oh, well, you know what, we have this extra income, and we want to leverage it from our equity. There's a ton of things that I would really sit down with them before letting them do that, and make sure that they're aware of, because it's not just this cash cow from the sky that just it's a business, and it's a full-time business, and people really need to recognize that before they get themselves into it. Because once someone's in there, there's no one that has more rights, and rightfully so, but there's no one that has more rights than the tenant.
Yeah.
The tenant is
King.
very well protected, and they should be, but when you're the landlord, you want to make sure that you have
That's
a
right.
very clear understanding of what the rules are.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of times commercial property, what makes sense is if you're, say, a dentist, and instead of renting a place, you buy a commercial property, and you're one of the tenants for yourself,
That's right.
and you're there also keeping an eye
Right.
on things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it can be very
That's
tough.
actually the ideal situation, is to own the business end of where you're working, own the building, and then have whether it's on a small scale and you have a few other people renting, or if it's on a big scale and you own a big property, like some clients that I do have that have bought or purchased, I should say, a large building, and rented out space to 12 to 15 other places, and then just taken one small unit for their own little business. And
Right, because that way they're there keeping an
You
eye
got
on
an eye on the
things.
situation, for sure.
So buying a house, it's a very serious investment, and I think that a lot of times people are too afraid and they wait too long. You have to
Right.
get into that market before it's too late, and the prices are going up. I think people are always surprised. Newlywed couples, I think as soon as they can, buy. I don't like condos personally. I don't think they're an amazing investment. You can argue with me on that, but I feel that the monthly fees are much more than they should be, and people are having problems now. They're buying condos in older buildings in Toronto that are 30 years old,
right,
and they're getting hit with bills for the underground parking, millions of dollars to fix up that underground parking.
For sure.
I feel that if you're a newlywed couple, instead of spending money on furniture and jewelry and whatever else, managed with one car, and you don't have kids yet, now's the time to get into the market, buy a townhouse if that's all you can afford, freehold. I don't like condos and things like that very much, but get into the market, give Michael or Eric even a call and find out what you can afford. I think people will be surprised at what they can afford because interest rates are so low. I remember my first house, we had a mattress on our floor for a year and a half. Didn't buy bedroom furniture. What is it? Well, it's a mattress on the floor. We had a bridge table, I think, in the kitchen for my parents, and we just got our couch and TV in the living room, and we slowly built up the equity that way. I think that
people are in too much of a rush to have all the things right now, right away.
They want all the toys, and the toys aren't. When you look back on your life, nobody regrets that they purchased a house, I don't think. I think that oftentimes people maybe are sorry that they didn't push themselves to buy a little bit bigger because they're moving too often, and the expenses of moving are quite high, and they move to a house they go from a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom, and then 3 years later they go from a 4-bedroom to a 5-bedroom, and they should have just pushed themselves to buy that 5-bedroom in the first place, and maybe not spend money on furniture and landscaping and cars.
I agree with it, but at the same time, I always try to be weary about making sure that I agree, that's what I did. I mean, I went after the property that I knew I could stay in a little bit longer and that it was going to be a better investment, and I'm very happy I did that. So you're absolutely right, but at the same time, people, the one thing about this industry is that every single situation is completely different, and to generalize it and say this is what they should do, I would never do that. I look at it more so as to say, look into your own situation and give yourself an honest assessment of what it is that you are comfortable to pay, and what you are comfortable to, and how you're comfortable to live. Because as much as it's good to go out and get that, you're absolutely right. I just don't think it's the right thing to push people to go and get themselves over their head, because that is, we mentioned about divorce and stuff. That's one of the main things that brings on the stress, and there's that fine line where you should be and you're comfortable. And that's where I like to recommend people.
But it's a few $100s difference in the mortgage.
Right.
Yeah. You're right.
When I meet with clients and they ask me about, is this a good investment? How much money am I going to make? My response to them is, can you see yourself staying in there for 5 years if you have to? Right. And if the response is, well, I don't want to stay here for a year, and then I want to flip, and I want to buy, and I want to do, my advice is, well, then you're playing a dangerous game, because we don't know what the market's going to be like in 12 months, 24 months.
There's no crystal ball.
But I can tell you, over 60 months, over 5 years, you're going to be okay. So if you're purchasing with that mentality, I got to get in and I got to get out, or purchasing with the mentality, I can stay in this property for the next 5 years.
No matter what happens.
If it's got to be 6 years, I love the house, I'm okay, it's my location. My advice is always, then that's the right purchase for you. But if it's like, no, this is temporary, Eric. I'm in and I'm out. I want to make $50,000 and then I'm going to go and buy something else.
The flipping can cost them $40,000, and all that time and aggravation.
It doesn't always work that way.
And you know what? Maybe you have to take out the paintbrush and paint your house yourself.
That's right.
I remember doing that. I had my painting clothes for my first house. It's been great talking to Eric Iankelovic, and am I saying your name right? And yes, Michael Switzer. They've given us some great things to think about, and maybe people shouldn't push themselves to afford too much. But what I'm suggesting is that maybe cut down just that at one time a week at a restaurant. Instead of going 3 times a week, go once or twice. You don't have to have the latest in furniture and cars and toys and things like that. I think people really consider buying a house that you can stay in not just for 5 years, but for 10 or 15 years and stay there. Find other ways to invest. Maybe buy a property that is a real fixer-upper and fix it up yourself. Once you have to pay somebody in this market, you're not going to get your money out of it. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in, and we've had a lot of fun today. The weather's gorgeous outside, so everybody wear sunscreen. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.